One of my few IRL friends once recently told me, "Hey Jeff, I think it'd do you some good to stop being so negative." He might have had a point there because you can usually tell which part of the lab I've been working in each day by the amount of hair that's on the floor. This got so bad that my barber even told me that my hair was thinning out. When I asked him what I could do, he paused for a second and said, "Pray." That's not a great look for a 20-something-year-old, but in my defense, I've never seen a physicist with more than 50% of their hair left. So in consideration of the fact that I'm starting to look like a Sphinx cat, I've decided to turn over a new leaf and start making positive content. In fact, I've recently discovered that I love being an American. This shouldn't really come as a surprise for those of you who are also in academia, because almost all research funding in physics comes from American government organizations. If your research has even the tiniest chance of being useful to the military, the government will gladly throw millions your way. In fact, I'd argue that most research professors at large schools are more decorated than an Army general or a Navy admiral if you look at their website. Especially in physics, they'll have grants from the Air Force, Navy, Army, Department of Energy, Central Intelligence Agency, Space Development Agency, and more three-letter acronyms than you can count. So my PhD is being paid for by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. You better believe I'm going to bleed red, white, and blue. It's in my DNA, or should I say, my USA. But there were two big events that really cemented my patriotism. The first was a trip I went on to California. After being dragged to an Erewhon by a friend and seeing that a bottle of hot sauce cost more than my weekly food expenses, I immediately changed my plans about visiting any of the big cities. Instead, I discovered that there were quite a few naval bases in the area, and having a long-standing interest in making my way onto as many government lists as possible, I decided to go and take a look. Now, I know ships are big, like really big, but nothing could have prepared me for when I got out of the car and saw a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier in the dock. I can tell you that it's 4 football fields long or that it weighs more than 100,000 tons, but nothing will ever compare to being there in person and seeing the sun be consumed behind the massive gray outline of this behemoth. As I watched people that looked to be about the size of ants scurry around on the top deck of the ship, I was overcome with emotion. This is why I pay my taxes. This is why I don't have free healthcare. This is why I have student debt. And you know what? It's worth it. The military might of this single ship could bring most nations of the world to their knees. Its economy-crushing $11.2 billion price tag is more than the GDP of at least 44 countries, and that's not even counting how much the planes and the personnel cost. For some context of the scale of this Leviathan, every other country in the world doesn't have more than 3 operational aircraft carriers because they cost so much to make. America's aircraft carriers not only cost more than double the amount of their foreign counterparts, they also have 11 of them. It really does give you some context as to how the Navy manages to spend $230 billion a year and why we developed a portable sun to throw at the last group of people who had the audacity to touch our boats. In an unrelated note, a long-standing naval tradition is to have a woman sponsor your ship. From what I can gather as someone whose only experience on ships was twisting his ankle on a Carnival cruise, which somehow wasn't the worst part of the cruise. Sponsors are supposed to bring good luck to your ship by giving a part of their personality, spirit, or something similar to the ship. Women are usually chosen to be sponsors because ships are thought of as being female. I don't really know, but if there are any sailors watching, feel free to tell me what I'm missing in the comments. Anyways, the US Navy is building a new set of aircraft carriers which cost a minimum of $13 billion each. One of these is the USS Enterprise, and guess who sponsored it? Not some congresswoman or the wife of an admiral. It's Katie Ledecky and Simone Biles. I don't know why I find this so funny, but I just have this image in my mind of Ledecky getting into an argument with Olympic judges in Paris and summoning the USS Enterprise like a JoJo stand. After the spiritual experience of seeing a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that cost millions of times more than everything my entire bloodline has ever earned, I decided to lean into my American heritage as much as possible during this trip. My next stop was, thus naturally, a Bass Pro Shop. For the foreigners watching this video, a Bass Pro Shop is the most concentrated distillation of what it means to be an American. It has profound cultural importance and is closer to a religious experience than a simple fishing goods store. Think about it. The blast of icy cold AC as you walk in cleanses your soul as you embark on your journey through a diorama of the American wilderness. As you deny your temptations by passing through the sea of fishing shirts, you find a pond complete with running water and swimming fish. Instead of being sunk into the ground, however, A being beyond your comprehension has raised the pawn 3 meters into the air and sliced it clean in half, placing a single invisible plane between you and the aquatic creatures that helplessly wriggle against the restraints of their artificial prison. The futility of their mindless struggle seems to hint at the inevitability of your own fate, but you must move on. As you ascend the steps of this temple, you notice the disembodied heads of animals seemingly observing your progress from their elevated perches. In life, they had been terrifying masses of sinew and muscle, but the same master who imprisoned the aquatic creatures has silenced their terrestrial cousins with such overwhelming force that many appear to be unaware that they are deceased. You understand that the god of this temple is a supernatural, if not omniscient existence who commands life, death, space, and time as if it were a man molding wet clay. Finally, having passed the grisly reminders of this god's authority, you come face to face with the altar. Behind a cordon staffed with temple priests, you see the sleek metal forms of the tools that this god used to smite his enemies. Arranged in an array that stretches from wall to wall, you greet the priests, who hand you this otherworldly machine. A galvanic spark reaches out to you from this implement of destruction, as if to connect you to the hands of divinity itself. The priest addresses you and informs you of the instrument's immortal name in a tongue unspoken by man. That, my friend, is an AR-15. That's how it'd normally be, except because I was in California where there were more gun laws than there are citizens, they instead offered me a slingshot with a $1,200 ATF tax stamp. This while the crackhead I walked past on the way to the store offered to get me a Glock with a beam and a switchy. At the end of my California excursion, I had only been partially convinced of the greatness of our country. My excitement at seeing an aircraft carrier that can bring continents to their knees was somewhat tempered by the fact that I was surrounded by Fent zombies. It wouldn't be until I left the country that I finally gained the perspective I needed in order to understand what it really meant to be an American. After graduating from my university in the spring and realizing that I would have to return in the fall for another 6 years to do my physics PhD, I decided to give myself a couple of weeks off. With the goal of getting as far away as possible from my personal gulag, I went out of the country for the first time in nearly 9 years. Almost immediately after touching down, I realized that something was profoundly different. Beyond the language barrier, the different native demographics, and the sweltering heat, the thing I remember most clearly about my first day abroad was how cheap everything was. Even inside of the airport, a bottle of water was going for 50 cents. Outside, they were closer to 10. And because I had specifically chosen a place that wasn't a popular tourist destination, I was often the only American in the vicinity. It brought to mind the story of the great king, Mansa Musa. For those of you who don't know, Mansa Musa was a Malian king from the 14th century AD. More so than anyone else, he's known for being one of the biggest ballers in history.
Real trap shit.
It's said that everywhere he went outside of his kingdom, he spent so much money in gold that he caused long-term inflation. And it wasn't like he was going to some rundown little village to do this. After he went to Egypt, the price of gold dropped 12%. Mansa Musa is probably the only person in history who could go band for band with entire countries and still come out on top. So, for less than $100 each week, I would eat out for all 3 of my meals, buy whatever I saw in store windows, call ride shares for anything further than 100 meters, and drop 50+% tips on my orders. It was actually during one of these nights out on the town practicing some trickle-down economics that I got into a bit of an incident. I bumped into some dude who was clearly intoxicated, and naturally, he threatened to kill me.
What the skibidi, man?
But for some reason, I was able to just brush it off. Not because I felt like a rich snob who could pay to make his family disappear, but because, what was he going to do to me? People at my university, some of whom I've known personally, get stabbed, shot, hit by cars, and all manner of horrible things. When someone threatens to kill me in the US and starts reaching for their waistband, I take them at face value and book it out of there. But here I was in a country where it was the equivalent of a domestic terrorism charge to own a knife that was too long, let alone a gun. So what can this random inebriated citizen do to me? He's too drunk to fight me given that he can't walk in a straight line, and my language comprehension is so poor that I don't even understand all of the curses he's throwing my way. And so I did something very out of character for myself. I just smiled at him and said something along the lines of, "I hope you enjoy the rest of that bottle," before walking off. You know, it's sometimes hard to be proud of being an American, especially if you follow a lot of mainstream news outlets. It seems like the country is becoming more violent, more stupid, and more divided. Prices are high, wages are low, and some girl who had a 5-second voice bite is making 50x my yearly salary. But I, for one, finally realized what all of that suffering gets us. It gets us the ability to summon a $13.3 billion aircraft carrier if we get kidnapped overseas. It gives us the strongest currency in the world with which you can change the local economic dynamics of foreign lands, and it grants us tolerance. Because what could be worse than living in the greatest country in the world?